Nobody warns you that the moment your life collapses, it smells like pine resin and burnt coffee, and that you'll spend years unable to separate the two ever again. I know what you're thinking. You think this is a betrayal story. You think you already know where it goes. The overheard conversation, the crumbling marriage, the woman who picks herself up and builds something new. You've heard that story 100 times, but I need you to stay with me, because what I overheard that Thursday afternoon in the hallway outside our kitchen was not what I thought it was. And the real truth, the truth I only uncovered 11 months later, is something no one who knows us has ever been told. Not my sister, not my therapist, not the lawyer I hired in a fog of cold certainty the morning after. My name is Veradis. My husband's name is Coltrane. Not Coleman, not Cole. Coltrane, like the musician, because his mother was the kind of woman who believed names were prophecies. Coltrane Ashburn, 39 years old. 6 feet of quiet intelligence wrapped in someone who always smelled faintly of cedar and machine oil, who read dense military history before bed and made the best fried plantains I have ever tasted in my life. We had been married for 7 years when I heard him say it. I want to reconstruct that afternoon with surgical precision because the details matter in ways I didn't understand at the time. It was a Thursday in early November, the kind of day where the light goes amber at 3 in the afternoon and everything looks like an oil painting someone forgot to finish. I had come home early from my shift at the textile archive. I catalog and restore antique fabric samples, a job so niche that most people's eyes glaze over before I finish explaining it. Because there had been a slow water leak near the preservation room, and the senior archivist, a furious and brilliant woman named Dorinda Suave, had sent half the staff home while the plumbers worked. I came in through the side door. Habit. I always came in through the side door because the main entrance stuck in humidity, and I was too stubborn to ask Coltrane to fix it again. I set my bag down on the small bench near the coat hooks. I could hear voices in the kitchen. Coltrane and his brother Feverin, who visited without warning the way some people breathe, naturally, without apparent intention. I was about to push open the door. My hand was literally against the wood, fingers spread, about to push. And then I heard Coltrane say, very quietly and very clearly, "The papers are signed, Fev. It's done." I did not push the door open. I stood there with my palm flat against painted wood, and I felt something I can only describe as the ground floor of myself dropping away. Not panic. Panic is loud and hot. This was something colder, a rearrangement, like when you look at an optical illusion and your brain suddenly locks onto the other image and you can never fully unsee it. Fevrin said something low that I couldn't make out. And then Coltrane said, "She doesn't know yet. I haven't figured out how to tell her." I pulled my hand away from the door. I walked back out the side entrance. I sat in my car in the driveway for 47 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard with the focused intensity of someone performing a medical procedure on themselves. I needed numbers. I needed something concrete. The numbers were 3:14 when I sat down, 4:01 when I started the engine and drove to my sister Renly's apartment across town. Renly is 6 years younger than me and lives the way I used to live, before I became a person who restores antique fabrics and monitors humidity levels, impulsively, loudly, with an enviable lack of consequence. She opened her door and looked at my face and said, "Come in and sit down and tell me everything, and I'll get the bourbon." So I told her. I told her exactly what I had heard. She listened the way Renly always listens, which is with her whole body, leaning forward, her hands around her glass. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "V, before you do anything, you need to be absolutely sure what those papers are." I told her I knew what they were. She said, "You think you know." I didn't listen to her. I want to say that clearly and take full ownership of it. Renly told me not to assume, and I assumed. Because the word papers in the context of a marriage means exactly one thing to a woman who has spent the last 18 months watching her husband grow quieter and more distant, who has cataloged every small change in his behavior with the obsessive attention she normally reserves for 16th century brocade samples, who has noticed that he sleeps on his side now instead of his back, that he no longer reaches for her hand during films, that the little rituals they had built together over 7 years were eroding the way shorelines erode, too slowly to watch but catastrophically in retrospect. Papers are signed. It's done. She doesn't know yet. I hired the lawyer on a Friday morning. His name was Printham Gold, a small, precise man with a walrus mustache and an office that smelled of old paper and radiator heat. He laid out my options with the calm efficiency of someone who had explained the same geography 1,000 times. I signed what needed to be signed. I paid the retainer. I drove home. That night I made dinner. Coltrane came home at 6:15. He kissed me on the cheek. I watched his face for the crack in his performance and found nothing, which I told myself was proof of how practiced the deception had become. We ate. We talked about small things. He asked about the water leak at the archive, and I told him Dorinda was furious and that the plumbers had found a second leak behind the east wall. He said that Fevrin had been by. I said I knew, that I'd seen his truck in the driveway. I did not say I had come home early. I did not say I had stood in the hallway and heard everything. After dinner, he washed the dishes the way he always did, methodically, the glasses first, then the plates, then the pots. And I sat at the kitchen table watching him and feeling the strange double exposure of it. The way you can love someone and grieve them simultaneously. The way the past can become so vivid it almost overlays the present. I spent the next 3 weeks in a state I can only describe as controlled disintegration. I went to work. I restored a fragment of 18th century Spanish damask with hands so steady, Dorinda told me I had the nerves of a surgeon. I came home. I cooked. I slept beside Coltrane and listened to him breathe and tried to memorize the sound, the particular rhythm of it, because I was convinced I was losing access to everything I had taken for granted. I did not confront him. I don't know why. Pride, maybe. Or something more complicated. The same thing that keeps you from looking directly at a solar eclipse, even when you know it's happening. The light is too direct. The knowledge is too total. It was Fevrin who unraveled it. This is the part I am still processing. 11 months later, sitting in the same kitchen where my husband stood at the sink washing dishes, while I quietly dismantled our life without his knowledge. It was a Sunday. Fevrin had come for lunch, which was unusual. He normally visited Coltrane alone, the way brothers do, in the gaps of other people's schedules. But this Sunday he arrived when both of us were home, with a bottle of wine and a nervous energy I had never seen in him before. Fevrin is 10 years older than Coltrane and carries himself like someone who has already had the conversation you're trying to start. He is not nervous, except on this Sunday he was. We ate. Coltrane made the plantains. The wine was a Malbec from somewhere in Argentina that Fevrin had been given by a client and didn't want to drink alone. We talked. And then, in the particular gap that sometimes opens in a Sunday lunch when everyone has finished eating and nobody has reached for their phone yet, Fevrin looked at me and said, "V, has Coltrane told you yet?" The room contracted. I felt Coltrane go still beside me. I said, very carefully, "Told me what?" Coltrane said, Fevrin said, "She should know. It's been almost a month." And then Coltrane looked at me, really looked at me, in a way that he hadn't done in so long, that I had forgotten the specific quality of his attention, the way it made me feel simultaneously seen and safe, and said, "I've been trying to find the right moment. I bought the building, V, the one on Harrith Street. I signed the papers last month. I heard something inside me go completely quiet. The building, I said. The old print shop. I've been in negotiation for 2 years. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to get your hopes up if it fell through. You know how those things go. Commercial real estate. It collapses 100 times before it works. But last month, the final offer was accepted. I own it. I want to open the workshop. The workshop. I need to stop here and explain something, because this is where the story reveals the depth of my own blindness. Coltrane had wanted to open a restoration workshop for as long as I had known him. Not textile restoration like my work, furniture and architectural elements. Antique doors, salvage floorboards, century-old mantelpieces that people rip out of old houses without understanding what they're destroying. He had talked about it in the early years of our marriage with the bright specificity of a real dream, the kind that has a location and a business plan, not just a feeling. He had wanted space, a real space, not the corner of our garage he currently used for small projects. He had wanted Harrith Street specifically because it was in the old manufacturing district of the city, and the buildings there still had the original bones. High ceilings, north-facing skylights, loading dock access. He had been negotiating for 2 years. He had been growing quieter and more distant for 2 years. He had been protecting me from the possibility of disappointment for 2 years. And in the 3 weeks since he signed those papers, while he was trying to find the right way to tell me, the right dinner, the right evening, the right moment that honored what the dream meant to both of us, I had hired a divorce lawyer, paid a retainer, and begun the silent demolition of our marriage with the methodical precision of someone who catalogs antique fabrics for a living, and therefore understands, down to her marrow, how irreplaceable things get destroyed when people stop paying attention. I looked at Coltrane. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't immediately read, and then I realized what it was. He was nervous. He was afraid I would be angry that he had kept it from me. He was bracing for the reasonable, measured version of my reaction. He had absolutely no idea. The building, I said again. It needs a lot of work, he said quickly, reading something in my face that he couldn't quite interpret. The second floor has water damage, and the electrical is a disaster, but the structure is sound. Dorinda's husband, you know he does commercial renovation. I talked to him last week. He said 6 months minimum, maybe 10. I know the timing isn't ideal. Coltrane, I said. He stopped. I said, I need to tell you something. Fevrin, with the preternatural social intelligence of a man who has brokered difficult conversations his entire life, stood up quietly and said he was going to get the wine from the kitchen. He disappeared. I heard him run the tap. He stayed in there for a very long time. I told Coltrane everything. The early return from the archive, the hallway, my hand flat against the door, the 47 minutes in the car, Prentham Gould and his walrus mustache, and the retainer I had paid. Every single thing. Coltrane listened without speaking. He has always been a good listener. It was one of the first things I noticed about him years ago. The quality of his silence, the way it felt inhabited rather than empty. He listened to all of it. When I finished, the kitchen was very quiet. I could hear the tap still running. I could hear traffic outside, distant and continuous. He said, You thought I was divorcing you? Yes. For 3 weeks. Yes. He was quiet for another long moment. Then he said, V, why didn't you ask me? And this is the question that has lived inside me ever since. Not accusingly. Coltrane said it with a gentleness that was almost worse than anger would have been. He said it like someone genuinely trying to understand the architecture of a mistake. Why didn't I ask? I have spent 11 months with that question. I have brought it to Dorinda, who is, despite her ferocity, an unexpectedly profound thinker about human behavior, and she said something that stopped me cold. She said, "Verities, people don't ask questions they're afraid will confirm what they already believe. Certainty is a narcotic, even terrible certainty." I thought about the Damascus sample I had been restoring the morning I hired the lawyer. 18th century Spanish brocade, woven with the gold thread that had oxidized over time into something that looked, at first examination, exactly like deterioration, like damage, like the fabric had simply failed. But when I put it under proper light, with the right magnification, I could see that what looked like decay was actually a patina, the natural transformation of the metal over 2 centuries of use and care. The fabric hadn't failed, it had changed. And if someone had discarded it on the basis of the first impression, they would have destroyed something irreplaceable. I had looked at my marriage under bad light. I had used the wrong magnification, and I had come very close to discarding something that was not damaged, something that was, in fact, in the process of becoming more itself. I called Prentham Gould on a Monday morning. His assistant, a sardonic and efficient young woman named Bex, put me through immediately. I told him I needed to dissolve the consultation and that the situation had resolved. He paused for a moment and then said dryly, "Mrs. Ashburn, you are not the first person to call me with this particular development, and I sincerely hope you have a good answer for why the situation resolved." I told him about the building on Harrith Street. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My advice is free at this point. Since you're dissolving the retainer, talk to your husband. Not about the building, about why you didn't ask." I did. It took 3 conversations over 10 days, each one harder and more necessary than the last. We sat at the kitchen table, the same chairs, the same amber November light, because it was November again by then, a full year gone. Coltrane talked about why he had withheld the news about the building, about the specific texture of his fear that it wouldn't work out, about the way he had watched his father collapse when a business failed and had sworn never to let someone he loved witness him fail in the same way. I talked about the 18 months of watching him grow distant and cataloging every small change in building, brick by brick, a conclusion that I had never once thought to test out loud. We talked about how 2 people who genuinely loved each other had managed to nearly dismantle everything they had built through a combination of protective silence and reckless assumption. The renovation on the Harrith Street building finished in 8 months, which was 2 months faster than Dorinda's husband's most optimistic estimate. Coltrane's workshop opened on a Thursday in early summer, which felt like the right kind of symmetry. A Thursday, early, a different ending to the same type of afternoon. I went to the opening. Of course I went. But what I want to tell you about that day is not the opening itself, the salvaged wood floors they had sanded back to their original honey color, the north-facing skylights flooding the space with that particular flat white light that restorers love. The people Coltrane had quietly built relationships with over years of doing small projects from our garage, all of them there, all of them believing in what he was building. What I want to tell you about is the moment before. We were standing outside on the sidewalk on Harrith Street, maybe 20 minutes before the doors opened. It was early summer, and the light was doing that long afternoon thing it does in our city, going sideways and golden, touching everything at an angle. Coltrane was wearing a white linen shirt, and he had a smudge of something, varnish, maybe, or the residue of a last-minute repair, on his left forearm. He was nervous in the good way, the way you're nervous before something you've wanted for a long time finally arrives, when wanting it has become so habitual that its arrival feels faintly unreal. He looked at me and said, "I keep thinking you're going to tell me it's not real." I thought about a hallway. I thought about my hand flat against a painted door. I thought about 47 minutes in a car watching a clock, and a lawyer with a walrus mustache, and a piece of 18th century damask that looked like decay until you looked at it correctly. I took his hand. I said, It's real, and so is everything else. He looked at me, that specific quality of his attention, that inhabited silence. Everything else, he said. All of it, I said, even the parts I almost destroyed. He nodded, not a happy nod exactly, a nod that contained the full weight of what we had almost done to each other, what I had nearly done without his knowledge, the particular fragility of things that have survived something they were never supposed to know about. A serious nod, the kind of nod that means, I know, I choose this anyway. The doors opened at 5 o'clock. Dorinda came. She brought her husband, who walked the space with the proprietary satisfaction of someone who had worked on it. Fevrin came and stood in the corner drinking wine and watching his brother move through the room with the specific pleasure of someone who has witnessed a long project reach its destination. Renly came and immediately began photographing everything for reasons she described as content, and which I suspected were actually closer to joy, documented in the only language she knew. I watched Coltrane. I cataloged him the way I catalog things I want to preserve. The particular way he holds his hands when he's explaining something, loose and open. The way he tilts his head when he's listening. The residue of varnish on his left forearm that he hadn't noticed and that nobody told him about. The long specificity of a person you have chosen to know completely. I thought about what Dorinda said. Certainty is a narcotic, even terrible certainty. I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count in the past 11 months. I think about it in the preservation room when I am examining something under magnification, forcing myself to consider what I might be misreading before I commit to a diagnosis. I think about it when Coltrane grows quiet for a day or two, and the old reflex rises in me, the cataloging reflex, the pattern recognition reflex, the reflex that wants to build a conclusion from fragments. I think about it and I ask a question instead. It sounds simple. It is, in practice, one of the hardest things I have ever done. Because Dorinda was right. The certainty is a drug, and what questions do is remove it. Questions leave you in the unresolved space, the space where the thing isn't confirmed yet, and that space is uncomfortable in a way that the most terrible certainty is not. At least certainty gives you something to act on. At least certainty ends the waiting. But the waiting, I have learned, is often the point. The waiting is where the actual information lives. The print shop on Hareth Street is doing well. Coltrane has 3 regular clients, an architectural preservation firm, a private collector of 19th century ecclesiastical furniture, and a hotel group that is restoring a set of 7 properties in the old part of the city and needs someone who understands the difference between restoration and renovation, between preserving what something is and making it look like something it never was. He has a hire now, a young woman named Isolde Wren, who studied conservation at an art school in the North, and who Coltrane found through a mutual contact in the salvage world. She is meticulous and a little strange, and she plays jazz at a volume that Coltrane has not yet found a way to object to, possibly because his mother named him after a musician, and there's a logic there he can't escape. We have dinner at the kitchen table most evenings. The side door still sticks in humidity. I still come in that way. Sometimes I stop in the hallway. I put my hand flat against the door, and I feel the specific pressure of what happened there, what almost happened, what was narrowly avoided by an accident of timing, and Fevrin's social intelligence, and a conversation over a Malbec from Argentina. And then I push the door open, and I ask, if you felt something in this story, share it, like it, and follow along. The next chapter might be yours.